Marcus is a connoisseur of anything that's free, so he was happy to read the disclaimer on TurboTax Free Edition.
Roughly 37% of taxpayers qualify. Form 1040 and limited credits only. See how at TurboTax.com. That's me!
File your taxes 100% free with TurboTax Free Edition and get your max refund guaranteed. See if you qualify to file for free at TurboTax.com. See max refund guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Wayne Callan, and you're listening to another Attitude ADHD Experts webinar. Today's topic, how to support and not enable your student, is one we could all use a little help with. I think we've all been there. You're sitting watching your child struggle with a homework math problem or a reading comprehension question, just itching to jump in and help her solve it. But you wonder if she would learn more if she did it herself. What is a parent to do in these situations and many others that crop up during a typical week? We have with us today Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-founders of ImpactADHD.com, an essential parenting resource for raising children with ADHD. They are also the co-authors of Parenting ADHD Now, Easy Intervention Strategies to Empower Kids with ADHD. They've been wrestling with these support versus enabling questions, and they've come up with great answers and strategies for us. They can help us navigate this blurry line in the sand. That all being said, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine and Diane now. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you. It is fabulous to be here.
Yay. Okay. This is great. This is such a topic. We hear about this all the time with the parents that we work with. And just as a sense of wrap up for what Wayne was sharing, we do parent training and coaching online and on the phone. And we, as you can imagine, one of the biggest questions we get from parents is, I think I'm helping my kids more than I should be, and I don't know what to do about it.
Right. What do I do? I know they need help, but somebody is telling me I'm doing it too much, or my sense is that I'm doing it too much. And it is, as you say, it's a fine line that we walk, right?
Particularly with these kids, because the reality is that there are times and places that they need help and they need support. We call it scaffolding a lot of times, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But the question is kind of how to walk that fine line, and how to, as they get older and have more maturity and and are able to take on more independence, how do you begin to hand off that independence to them instead of taking responsibility yourself too much?
So we want to start with asking the question, what's the difference between enabling and supporting? And as we talked about sort of preparing this presentation, we realized that, both of these words have a lot of baggage around them, right?
Yeah.
Enable may be positive for some people and may be
really
not for others, have all different kinds of connotations. And so we want to sort of draw a distinction here, not with, any clear definitions, but for each of you who are listening to think about what's the distinction for you. And so you can identify where you're trying to go by recognizing where you are. So if enabling means for you may mean, and for many I think may mean sort of over helping, over supporting, overdoing it, rescuing. We want to draw the distinction between that and supporting, which is providing supports, providing reinforcements, providing a way for people to become independent.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think part of this is not just the what does it mean to do one or the other. I think there's a certain energy underneath it, right? And so if I feel like I'm doing something that I shouldn't, I think that it's part of what makes you feel like it's across that line.
Right. So what we want to do today is walk you through what we talk about as role clarity for parents, the 4 steps of that a parent goes through from start to, well, there's never really finish.
There's never finish. Never ever.
But throughout our years of raising our kids, right, there's sort of 4 phases that we go through as we begin to foster independence and cultivate autonomy in our kids.
Well, and before we kind of get to the 4 phases, let's kind of talk a little bit about what tends to happen. And what happens, particularly if you've got an ADD kid, is, we end up, and I'm an adult with without ADHD. And so I ended up being executive function mom for years and years and years, and took care of everything, made sure everybody did everything. And as parents, we end up kind of directing more than, for a very, very, very long time. And then all of a sudden we wake up one morning and either our kid says, I want to do this myself, or I want to be independent, or we think they should be able to do it themselves. And so we want to like magically have them go, okay, now I'm in charge. Instead of mom or dad or whoever's in charge, I want to suddenly, as the young person, be in charge. And what we want to kind of talk through today is the fact that it really is several steps.
It's a process.
And so if you've got a teenager and you're listening to us right now, and you've been kind of taking charge and taking control in more situations than you want to, just know that it's not about waking up tomorrow and magically having your kid take control. It's really about going through this process in these phases. And this image here is talking about, it shows a baton. And the analogy we use is a relay race. And so if you think about it, if you were in a relay race, you wouldn't just one morning wake up and you wouldn't just like throw the baton across the field and expect and hope that the companion that you're running with would catch it. You would make sure that you've got it in a good position. You'd make sure that they have a hold of it. You'd both hold on to it for a while, and then you'd make sure that the other person had it firmly, and then you would let go. And I think that that's the analogy we want to kind of talk through, is that process of going from parent direction to child's empowerment.
Right. And so if you think about parenting as a gradual process of letting go, right? One step at a time, one issue, one topic, one activity at a time. What we want to talk about is walking you through the 4 phases, and we're going to give you some examples and some strategies to use for each phase. But we want you to recognize that you're going to go through this process again and again and again.
With different things.
With different aspects of what your kids are trying to learn. So your kids may be very developed and very independent in one area. Maybe they're getting themselves dressed, or they're older kids and maybe they're driving, but in other areas, they may still need support or additional scaffolding, maybe in terms of organizing their schoolwork or, making sure they're getting places on time. So we take aim on one thing at a time and recognize that our kids are going to be in different phases depending what the issues are that we're dealing with them.
Well, and I think that's an important context, is that, most of the kids that the parents are listening to today are challenged with they have executive function issues of some sort. And in general, these kids are somewhere between 3 to 5 years behind their same age peers in some areas of executive function. Now, it may not be all areas, and it may not be physically developed. I mean, I had a mom yesterday. We were talking about the fact that her daughter, her 12-year-old, is physically more like a 14-year-old, intellectually right at her age, but from an executive function perspective, much more, 4 or 5 years behind. And that's really the rule of thumb we use, is 3 to 5 years behind their peers in executive function development.
Right. So we're going to walk you through these 4 phases, but understand that you're not going to be in the same phase with every part of what you're dealing with your kid. That's part of the variety is the spice of life.
Well, and it's part of what can make it easier too, because you're not trying to do it all at once.
Exactly. It makes it easier, and it's recognizing that can be the challenge.
Right.
All right. So should we go into the 4 phases? Okay. So phase 1 is what we talk about in terms of motivating and directing work.
Right. So at phase 1, this is the stage at which the parent is really setting the pace. So I'm helping my child to know what needs to be done, maybe instructing them. I'm helping them to make sure that they're getting it accomplished. I'm really kind of in the lead in terms of making sure things are happening as a parent.
Right. So an example that we might use here in terms of homework help.
Right. So it's here's your homework. Why don't you have a snack and do homework before dinner so we can play a game later? So the motivation is playing the game. I'm instructing them. This is what you need to do. This is when you should do. And here's, so it's really the parent is setting the agenda in this,
right.
In this
parent's
scenario.
Still sort of in charge and directing the child's behaviors, right? Mm-hmm. And the tip that we want to offer for you here when you're still in this phase with your kid in whatever aspect is that the solutions are in the successes. And what we mean by that is that because we're looking at a gradual process with our kids, when we focus on what's working with them, that those successes are what lead to other successes. And that's where they can learn what works for them in one area and begin to apply it to the other.
Well, and I think the other piece of it is that if you'll be able to see, even in those situations where you're directing more as a parent, the places where your kids are more successful are a great opportunity to say, hey, this might be a place where my kid could be more independent because they're having some good success and some progress.
Exactly. So as we're in phase one and we're motivating and we're directing that work and we're guiding our child in their activities and their responsibilities, we want to start looking for their successes and pointing them out to our kids and helping them see where they're being successful so that they can feel confident in applying those skills, those newfound skills, as they move into phase two.
Well, and the story I love to tell about this is around motivation and my son. And it's, he was doing math problems and it was like 50 math problems. We split them across 2 days. And the first night he got them done in 20 minutes. And the second night it took literally 2.5 hours to get it done. And so I sat down and I said, well, what happened? What happened? What do you think was different? He said, well, Mom, my show was on Tuesday and it wasn't on Wednesday. So I wanted to get it done. And so it was a great opportunity to talk about motivation and help him to understand the role that motivation can play in helping his brain to be more successful and staying on track.
Right. And so when you're looking for the solutions, you look at, okay, what did work?
Right.
What didn't work? And then you were able to come up with a solution moving forward. Right. So that's phase one. Now we move into phase two, which is really about beginning to motivate ownership and model organization. So now we're wanting to start moving into a place where our kids are taking a little more ownership or responsibility for themselves and their actions.
Right. And so you want to, you might show, so the modeling piece of it is that they might need help figuring out how to set up an organization system or how to understand the role of motivation as an example. But what you're really trying to do is to begin to shift the ownership from you to the child. And a great example, I was talking to a parent yesterday. We were talking about getting out the door in the morning and to school on time. And I said, well, what's your child's motivation to get out the door and get to school on time? And he said, well, he really doesn't have one because I'm always like dragging him out the door and making sure he's out the door on time. And I said, well, what would happen if he was late for school, and would he care? And is there a motivation or opportunity there? But it's that sort of, as parents, someday you wake up and you go, wow, this is a big problem for me, but it's not at all a problem for my child. There's a disconnect there. And so you want to focus on finding ways to help your kids to get more engaged and to own the changes.
And so at that point, there's a great example. You've got a kid who's not bought in to owning being on time to school, and he doesn't have a motivation. And so it's still not his agenda. It's still the parent's agenda. But that parent will begin to start looking for ways to find that motivation for the child and to begin to model systems that will work for it. So the example here of a parent in stage 2 around homework help might be a parent who says, okay, here are the times that you have free to do homework. When do you want to do it? Where do you want to do it? How are you going to reward yourself when you're done? So you can we'll move into this more in the next one. You're beginning to hear the shift in language from my job is to direct you to beginning to foster that sense of this is your job. How do you want to do it?
Well, there's 2 pieces of it. Part of it is kind of, yes, using you language instead of we language or I language. But the other piece of it is increasingly asking more and more questions. Right. And so putting more of the ball into their court, which is really the tip that we have at phase 2 is shifting your language
around ownership.
And I think that there's these subtle differences,
right?
It's that sort of, when do you think you want to start your homework instead of
it's time for you to start your homework.
Right.
I was talking to a mom that I work with a 12-year-old daughter, and we realized that it was probably time to stop saying we so often, right? She's a mom with a single child. And it was, we need to do our homework. We need to get ready for bed. It's like, it's time for her to start doing her homework and her to start getting ready for bed. And just that shift of language as a parent, to stop saying, mommy wants you to, but I, or just very subtle shifts of language from I to you.
And part of it is just knowing your child too, because there are other kids who really like that connection and that companionship of the we, and it motivates them because they're having a hard time at feeling like they have to do it all themselves, and they're maybe have some self-doubt, that sort of thing. So it's about knowing your kid and stepping into language that feels good and helpful for them.
Well, and I guess what I would add to that, what you just said made me think about, remember that you're in different phases in different areas. So you may be shifting your language around ownership in terms of getting dressed by yourself in the morning or getting out the door in the morning, but still having a little more ownership around when do you start your homework.
Right.
So it's a gradual process.
And again, so one of the things we didn't say earlier, but these don't happen at certain ages. I mean,
No.
You guys are probably looking at the pictures going, okay, wait,
what age is my child
What
with?
time is my child going to switch to phase 3? Because I totally need them to move forward, right? So again, this is something that may happen, when they're 5 or 6 on some areas, and it maybe something that my son just left home for the first time, and there's a few things that he's shifting to at 18 or 19,
Yeah.
And so I think that it's about knowing that it's a process. It's about helping them through these steps, no matter what their age or stage.
Right. Well, I have a great example. Last week, my son, who's now 16, was looking at us. He had finished some homework, and he looked at us. And he said, I'm still pretty awake, and I have time. I might start working on something that's not due till next week. And my husband and I looked at each other like, what? Really? Are you kidding me? But it was this new level, he was stepping into a new phase of ownership. And it was no longer me motivating him to, you might want to consider doing, he had stepped into stage 3. And that was, it doesn't happen in all areas, but it was a really clear transfer, which is a great segue to phase 3.
So transferring ownership, which is really, it's their responsibility. It's their homework.
It's their agenda.
Job. It's their agenda. I think that that's an important piece. We talked a little bit about buy-in earlier. Parents come to me and they say, well, there's so many challenges. Where do I start? And you really want to start transferring ownership with something that they see as a challenge.
Mm.
So
or an opportunity.
Yeah, or an opportunity. So for example, my son, I remember at some point he ended up having a friend at school that liked to get to school early, and all of a sudden he wanted to be at school at 8:00 instead of 8:30. And so he had that motivation there, and it was a great opportunity to kind of say, okay, you want to get there in time to be there and talk to your friend.
What is it going to take for that to happen?
Exactly.
And how can I support you?
Exactly, which is the second piece of it, is supporting organization. Our kids may not know how to organize themselves. They may not know how to set up a system or a structure. They may not know what might work for them. And I think that a lot of times what we as parents do is we tell them what the solution is. And the great example of this is an agenda at school. And our kids are having a hard time capturing their assignments. And we say, well, if you just use your agenda.
Right.
So that's directing, right? Use your agenda. Here's how you use an agenda. That's directing. Supporting organization would be, what are some ideas you have for how you might capture your assignments to make sure that you have them when you get home and can easily start into your homework.
Well, and you might start by saying, I think it's great that you want to make sure that you know what your homework is when you get home. So that's their ownership. That's acknowledging that they own it. And now we have to help them learn how to support themselves in the process.
So the example around homework help. So what's the plan for the rest of your day? When are you doing homework? I know you're on top of things. So is there anything you need from me?
And so that's, again, so the first part of this is about, their agenda. What are you planning to do? How are you going to manage it? And then continuing to offer the support in cases where they need it. And the example that we use here, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is the notion that you take aim when you're tackling an issue and looking at, okay, this is an area where I want a little more independence. I'm ready to move to the next phase. You want to take aim on something your child wants, just like the example Diane used. Because if you're trying to take aim on something that you think is important, but your child doesn't,
you're going to be
really
back in
disappointed.
Spending a little bit more time back in phase 1.
That's right. And so their ownership requires their buy-in.
Right. Because, it's like you want them to be bought into the idea that picking up the towel on the floor is important, and they just don't even notice the towel on the floor. And so it's going to be a long walk between, you wanting the towel picked up to them saying, oh my gosh, I really want to clean up my bathroom right now. That's right.
It's the more that we can take aim on issues that have some relevance to our kids or importance to them, and let them learn from what matters to them, the more effective we tend to be over time. And it's hard to do because there's so many things that need to be done. And so we often want to take aim on the really big things.
Right.
But what we found is when you take aim on the little things and you feel some success and your kid feels some success, it tends to unfold in a much healthier way.
Well, that and this language thing, and we said that earlier, but the language piece of it is so important. Finding ways to ask questions. So, do you want, what kind of ice cream are you going to have for dinner tonight? Whether those just kind of basic sort of asking instead of telling is an important piece of it. Well,
and, you mentioned earlier that these phases aren't clear. They're not, specific to any particular age. And I think, we can start this process of transferring ownership at a really, really early age. And, we do it when our kids are in preschool and, do you want to wear the blue or the red? Right. And then we sort of forget as they move into elementary school. And yet what we're teaching our kids when we do that is the process of decision making. Yeah. And all of this is about when you become a decision maker and when you take ownership of your life and your responsibilities and learn how to make decisions confidently, that's what leads our kids to become independent and successful. And so all of this is sort of a long-term gradual process of cultivating decision makers.
Well, no, and I think that's really important because there are some areas where these kids need more direction much longer than their peers do. And the more we can give them choices and give them interaction to get their buy-in in the process, the easier that transfer is going to be eventually.
Exactly. All right. So then we move into phase 4. Phase 4 is where we all want to be forever, right? Ideally, a lot of kids will start hitting some aspects of their world in phase 4 in high school. In our realm, a lot of our kids don't get here till college,
right?
And that's pretty normal. And so this is about, at this point, the kids have bought in, they have ownership. It's their agenda that they're living their life. And our job is to continue to empower them, to champion them, to believe that they can do it, because sometimes it's hard, and to be available to them to troubleshoot when they run into trouble, right? And I want to use this example here, but then I want to go back and tell a story because I got an email this morning from someone that was great. But go ahead and do this.
So the example here is just, how's it going? What's been working for you? Are you struggling with anything?
What's going well?
What do you want to do differently? So here in this process, you'll see that you're actually challenging your child to kind of evaluate how things are going and kind of keep their awareness in case there's opportunity to make some changes, but you're not telling them what to do. And
you're presuming that they're on it,
yes,
that they're owning it, and that your job here is to be encouragement and support, right? And to really be your child's champion. And that's the tip we offer for this. And championing is actually a coaching skill. It's not just rah, you can do it, but it's really helping people see what it is about themselves that sets them up to be able to do it. It's not just, I know you can, but you've done this here, and here, and you've demonstrated that you can do this, and I believe that you can.
Yeah.
Right? And I know you can.
I was thinking about my son just, left off to a gap year for 9 months. And one of the things that they said is that they really focus in on helping kids to begin to advocate for themselves. And that's really what you want to be able to do, is to put your child in a situation where they understand their brain well enough to know what they need and can figure out a way to ask for that.
Right. Well, and the example I wanted to use was, I got an email from a client this morning whose high school senior just went off to college. And we've done a lot of work around helping to be as much in phase 4 as possible, but so that this kid was really ready to go and she was ready to support. And she wrote me to say they had the first incident where they sort of stepped back a little to phase 3, which is normal, right? But he had his first paper to write in college. And she had that experience of, how do I support from a distance? How do I be in that place where I'm encouraging and helping him with his ownership, but she had to step in a little bit to be a little bit more support. And she had to go back to phase 3 and support the organization, but it was still his agenda.
Right.
And it went really, really well. And she was really excited. And she wrote to say, thank you. This really, it made a huge difference for them to be prepared for this. And she knew that it wasn't a setback when he needed help. It was a normal opportunity to sort of shift roles a little bit and then shift again.
Which is an important segue here to kind of go back and restate the fact that these phases are not,
they're not static.
They're not static. You kind of move back and forth. It may be that with a new situation or a really stressful day.
Or a new job as they get to be young adults, right?
Well, or just even, certain areas of your life where you know that your child needs more support or needs less support. And to know, again, it's not going to happen at any one magic age. And what you want to be doing is taking your child through the steps.
And taking yourself
through the steps. Yes, exactly. So most of us wake up one morning and we're like, oh, I just want my kid to take care of this. I don't want to have to deal with it anymore. And from that point, you need to go through the phases and make sure you're doing that effective handoff and not just assuming your kid's going to be able to pick it up and take it over when you've been doing it for as long as you have.
Right. So we would encourage you to sort of capture this slide with these 4 phases and ask yourself occasionally, where am I in this process? When you're having an encounter with one of your kids and maybe things are getting a little tense, like, okay, what phase am I in? And what phase do we need for me to be in at this time? What would be the appropriate place for me to be right now? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for you as parents to ask yourself, how and when am I enabling and how and when am I supporting? Where am I at any given moment?
Well,
and where do I want to be?
And where do I want to be? And I think that there's 2 parts of this. One is kind of the actual, what am I doing? So my child is doing homework. What role am I playing? Mm-hmm. And then the other piece underneath it, which I think is absolutely critical in supporting, is how am I helping my child to get to the next level of independence? Mm-hmm. So it's not just how am I helping my kid get their homework done tonight, or how am I helping my kid to make sure that they take the dishes back to the sink after dinner. It's how am I helping them to learn and become more independent in whatever function it is that they're doing to get them to that next level.
Well, and what just came up as you said that for me is that this is all about process. This is a process of letting go, a process of fostering independence. And where our kids struggle the most is creating processes in life. Mm-hmm. And, we sometimes get fixated on what has to get done. And with our kids, I'm much more concerned that they learn how to get it done than that they get it done, yes. Right? I'm more concerned that they learn how to study regularly for a test than whether they get an A or B or C on the test. Because over time, as they get into life, they'll figure out how to achieve what they want to achieve if they learn how to put processes in place for themselves to be successful. And that's really what we're talking about here, is an overall process of how we as a parent support and our kids to become independent and successful.
So once you kind of looked at how and when you are enabling or supporting, challenge yourself to pick one of those areas and walk through these steps and say, well, which step am I on right now? And not, how can I let my kid do this on their own? But right. What's that next step? And how can I help them to be a little bit more independent, shift my language, hand off the baton a little bit?
Awesome. So we want to do a little wrap up. God, it's amazing how quick that goes.
It's true.
Because at the end of every call that we do, all of our group coaching calls, all of our training programs, Sanity School, everything we do, we always end our sessions with a coachy kind of a wrap up.
Well,
we're coaches.
Yeah, we're coaches. And I think that the thing is that it's not just enough to get this information. I mean, you've sat and listened to us for the last 30 minutes talk about the 4 different ages and stages and everything else. It's really about how do you make it work for you in your life.
Right. What are you going to do with what you've learned? So we want you to stop and ask yourself a few questions. What ahas did you have from this conversation? What's your takeaway? What did you learn? Just not specifically, but what really resonated for you? And then if appropriate, what action do you want to take, or what commitment do you want to make to some kind of an action to begin to shift things or apply what you've learned? And then based on that, how do you help yourself be successful? What do you need to do to set yourself up for success? Is it a reminder? Is it a calendar? Is it an accountability person? What do you need to be successful?
Is it a mantra that says, I can let go. I can let go.
Right. What will help you be successful with the commitment that you've made? And take a minute and feel free to capture those in the chat if you want to share them. I know that Wayne is at the ready to take some questions from you, and we are ready to take some questions.
Okay. Well, we have plenty of them. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for having
Kelly, let's see. Yes. Kelly had a question that centers around a bedtime routine. She says, my 10-year-old with ADHD and anxiety needs support during the entire routine. I've tried routine cards and routine boards, and neither are as effective as me directing the steps. help. What should I do here?
Well, so I think the first thing I would say is, what problem are you really trying to solve? Because it may be that for a while that your child needs verbal cues. And so I think the question is it that you think that he shouldn't? And so that he should be able to
be ready.
He should be ready and he's not. Is it about, is it a learning difference? I think that we always start from a place of curiosity and say, what's really going on? Is it that your child is tired that time of day and really wants to spend time with you and enjoy your company? Is it that your child is more of an auditory learner than a visual learner? And so an auditory cue is more likely to trigger them than, something on a piece of paper. Is it just hard because it's late at night and he's exhausted?
At the end of the day, he may have used all of his resources and all of his executive function, and he may not be just ready. And we often ask, Diane mentioned earlier, we call it taking the 3 to 5 challenge. Whenever you're facing a challenge with your kid, if you take off 3 to 5 years, so look at the situation and say, okay, he's 10 going on what? He's probably not 10 going on 11 developmentally. And we often say you take 3 to 5 years, and then after 5 o'clock, you take away another year or two.
Right.
Right. So is he developmentally more like 10 going on maybe 6? And would you expect, would it be reasonable to expect a 6-year-old to do that all independently? Or might there still need to be some scaffolding and support at that time of night for a kid who may need some emotional connection, as you said?
So you might go from, if you're having to walk them through every step, it might be, hey, buddy, you've got to brush your teeth and wash your face. I'll come back in 10 minutes and I know you'll have them both done and we can go on and get your pajamas on together. So it's that kind of.
Or you may choose even one.
Even one.
Yeah. Target one, take aim on one aspect of the bedtime routine that they can do by themselves or that he can do by himself instead of trying to do a whole routine, because multi-step process at that time of the day for a 10-year-old kid.
Hard for me that time of day.
Yeah, that could be, it may be an issue of expectations.
Right. That was good. I hadn't heard that. Subtract 1 year after 5 o'clock. That's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Sometimes 2. Yeah, after 5 o'clock, we're done. We're all done, right?
Regarding motivators and rewards, another Kelly asks, do you fear that we are just encouraging the need for a reward for each and every accomplishment?
Cool.
So the non-ADDer wants to answer this one first. Is that okay?
You may go.
So I have to say that's everybody asks that question. And the biggest aha that I had as a non-ADDer, living and working with ADDers all the time, is that the ADD brain genuinely has to be interested in something in order to do it, period. And once I kind of got that through my brain and realized, you know what, I've got to create interest here. And so the word motivation can mean a lot of different things. And there's lots of different things that motivate. We talk about 5 different motivations on our website. But it's really about understanding that you're trying to engage the brain. And, it could be something as simple as, making a joke and being funny and playing a game around something, or it could be an actual reward system. But the reality is that these kids have a brain that needs to be motivated.
Needs engagement and stimulation.
It needs it. And that's just the reality of the way that their brain works. So yes, the reality is that their brain will always probably need that on some level.
And here's what I would add to that, as speaking as somebody who does have an ADD brain, is I think that this is a really human experience.
Yeah.
Humans are motivated by acknowledgement, by recognition, by reward. We do go to work and get paid for it and expect bonuses at the end of the year. And
ask our boss to say,
to give us an atta-girl.
Right?
We're humans, and humans respond to encouragement, championing, reinforcement. And so for some kids, rewards that are more tangible are really what they love, but particularly if that's, the kind of kid who's really, jazzed by that stuff. Some kids are as easily rewarded by acknowledgement from their parents, or, an extra book at bedtime, or, you have to figure out what does motivate your child, and it doesn't always have to be money-based or stuff-based. But knowing that that's part of the human experience, that none of us really work without some purpose or reward. It may be an intrinsic or an internal reward. Mother Teresa loved to give in her life,
and
right?
She got a lot out of it.
She got out a lot of it.
And so part of it is the intrinsic piece of it takes time to develop.
Yeah.
And that's
a sophisticated level of emotional development.
Right, exactly. And so our kids are going to be probably not at pace with their peers in terms of their own intrinsic, I want to do this myself, I'm motivated to do this myself kind of world.
Yep.
Another parent asked, my teen son wants to take control of his high school career. I made a bargain with him saying that he can do that, but I will check his grades online. I love my son, but I don't think he can handle all the juggling. Should I just sit here and let him fail?
Mm.
So I'm a firm believer in scaffolding, and I think that it's about allowing your kids enough space to be as independent as they can be, and making sure that they know that you've got their back.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, it would be agreeing ahead of time with your child about when you're going to check in and how often you're going to check in, and say, yep, but it's my job as a parent to make sure that you're doing okay. And so, how do you want to do that? How often do we?
How do you want me to do that?
How do you want me to check it? So it's kind of reaching agreement, and it depends on the age of the child. And you said high school, but it's, I think that it's part of the should I let them fail? I think is the question. There is most of these kids don't learn from their mistakes the same way that
typical kids
do.
And they have plenty of opportunity for failure.
Yeah, they do.
Generally, that they're not wanting for that. They are wanting for success. And so the opportunity here is to break it down a little bit and come to that, as Diane says, to an agreement. Yeah, I am so excited that you want to take ownership of it. I'm really glad you want to do it. Let's transfer the baton step by step instead of throwing it all across, throwing it all and then expecting him to catch them all at once. Because he's got probably 6 classes. That's 6 batons.
How many grades in each class?
Right.
I mean, school is complex.
So you may want to start incrementally and share the vision with him of wanting to move in that direction, rather than just going full force without any transition. Give it some time for transition.
Well, and I think the other piece of it is the communication and building the relationship in a way that, and it may not happen overnight. This takes a while, but you want to be able to find a way to be able to say, hey, buddy, I noticed that you really were struggling on, studying for that test last week. How did you do? And did you do as well as you wanted to do? And if not,
what worked?
What didn't work?
And what do you want to do differently? Right.
Exactly.
And to be able to say, wow, it looks like you really mastered that. You took control of that and you did great with that. Looks like that's an area where you're ready to really take it on your own. What do you want to work on next?
Right.
Right. It's an incremental transition.
Yeah. Again, it's not enough to do. Your job as a parent is not just to help them do this stuff. It's to help them to learn how to be independent.
Right.
Mm-hmm. A parent has a problem. She is supporting her son, not enabling, she says, but she gets a lot of angry, snippy responses and pushback, which can often be disrespectful. So how does one handle that? That's an additional element that's sort of thrown into the mix. Some kids don't want to be supported.
Well, there's a lot. I don't have enough information there to answer that as thoroughly as I like, because it's hard to know what the age of the child is and what the dynamics are. But I do think that if you're regularly running into a dynamic where every time you're trying to support and you're getting pushback, there's a larger issue here that's around communication, and that's around checking in to make sure that what you see is happening is in line with what your kids see is happening, and finding that place, getting really curious about if your child is reacting that way, what are they experiencing from you that you may not even know that you're presenting? You may not intend to be giving out a particular message, but they may be getting it.
Well, and I think that it's always an indication when I'm talking to my clients and they say my kid's pushing back. It's always an indication that either the language we're using is more directive than they want it to be, or we are directing more than they want to be. And so it's a great opportunity when you're getting pushback to say, okay, how can I shift my language so that my kid sees that I'm putting this more in their court and not let them feel like I'm, hanging them out to dry. And I think that that's the important piece. The other thing I want to say to this person is that, it's the whole concept of disrespect and snarky kids. And I've got 2 snarky teenagers, believe me, I've been there. And part of it is, if we focus on the tone and the attitude and that sort of piece of it, we're going to respond very differently as parents than if we realize our kids just having a really hard time showing respect right now, either because they're exhausted or because they're feeling stressed or they're feeling
like they're afraid they're going to fail.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that go on with our kids that are completely invisible that we have no idea. It's like until you kind of get in and underneath it, you never know when a kid is afraid of failing and that their facade of I've got this, mom, or their tendency to kind of sit in front of a screen for 24 hours a day is really maybe hiding something. And so it's important to kind of keep that mindset. Because if we get triggered by disrespect, our ability to kind of really help our kids problem solve and to be there for them is really different.
Well, and the strategy that I would offer, and we teach this in a lot of our programs, is to use curiosity. When you're feeling frustrated, instead of getting mad, get curious. Try to understand what's going on. Ask, I don't mean interrogate your child, right, but I mean sort of figure out, okay, what's going on? What might have happened today? What time of day is it? Is my kid hungry? Are they embarrassed?
Well, my challenge to my clients is always come up with at least 3 things that might be going on, because the reality is it's not just one thing with a teenager,
exactly,
particularly. And our first instinct may not be the right one. And right, so,
look at the context of what's happening. Yeah. Really, really pay attention to the dynamic and when it's happening and what else is happening before it and around it. And let that guide you in beginning to shift. And I guess the message I want to say, what we talk about here, our method is what we call a coach approach. It's taking a coach approach to parenting, because coaching is all about empowering people to reach their full potential, to become their best selves. And as parents, we have the capacity to shift our approach to how we're parenting our kids to really empower them to become more independent, to, all of the things we've been talking about today. But the shift starts with us, not with them. And often as parents, we want them to change their behavior. We want them to do something differently. But the truth is that it often starts with us, that a minor tweak in how we're talking to our kids or not reacting when they get snarky or when they get frustrated can have a whole different result and impact in our communication with them and our ability to stay calm as Diane says, to problem solve with them.
Mm-hmm. Here's a tough question. It's about a spouse. This mom says that her husband stays stuck in 100% enabling mode and doesn't really want to move on to supporting. Apparently he has ADD himself. So how can she persuade him to get out of that enabling mode?
Well, I would encourage him to listen to this webinar if he can. And just talk about the 4 phases and try to step out of that tendency to, I don't mean to say that you're accusing, but people with ADHD often feel, adults with ADD, and I speak from experience and with my spouse, often feel that I'm sort of pointing a finger and accusing when I don't intend to be. But I think when we've been raised with ADD, particularly those of us who were not treated well along the years, we have a real tendency to be defensive and to react and to not see someone's intention, but to just feel judged or shamed or blamed, which was sort of the story of our lives. And so I think when, the first place the first thing that comes up for me is to step out of trying to convince him, right? Don't try to persuade him or convince him, because he's likely to dig in his heels and get defensive in that situation. And instead to really, as I said a little while ago, get curious, to look at what's happening that has him wanting to provide this additional support for the child, to get into an open conversation around that issue of how we begin to transfer the baton.
Well, I think the other thing I would add is it's the focusing on the solutions and the successes, right? So if you can focus on supporting in areas where, if your spouse is really focused on, let's say, homework and kind of really kind of hand-holding your child through the homework part of it, if you have other areas of your life where you can give your child a little bit more room to be more independent, and then have conversations about, wow, did you notice, how well that went? And they were able to do X, Y, and Z on their own, and that was great. And I wonder what else they might be able to do on their own. And so it's like you focus on what's working, and you just highlight what's working as a way to open the door to conversation with your spouse.
And the other thing I'll say is there are two resources that I would encourage you to check out. One is Melissa Orloff teaches a great class on ADHD and marriage that I highly recommend for any marriage particularly where one spouse has ADD and one does not. And the other would be our Sanity School program, which is a really good training program in understanding the dynamic and what our roles are as parents. And both of those resources would be a really inexpensive and profoundly impactful way to begin to shift the communication patterns between you as parents.
Mm-hmm. A mom has asked, I am trying to teach my daughter how to move more quickly through the morning so she isn't late for school, but it disturbs the rhythms of my other kids as they get ready for school. So to avoid that, I try to help her along to maintain domestic tranquility. But I can't help but believe that I am enabling her. What should I do? What about when there's no real convenient time for support? You have to enable to move things along. Do parents run into that?
Oh yeah.
I think that's true. So it's the question, are you doing it from a choice perspective? Are you doing it consciously? Are you saying, you know what, we've only got 15 minutes.
I'm going to do this for you now.
Deck,
right. And it may not be the area to take aim on right now. There may be other areas that don't impact other members of the family where you can be working on and fostering independence. And this may be an area where it makes sense for the larger picture for the family to continue to scaffold because the family's not ready. When we, in one of our presentations on systems and structures, we talk about making sure that the structure works for everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the other thing I would say is that this might, it may not be the right time to work on it, but it may be something you work on the weekends. It may be something that you work on over a summer break or a winter break where it's kind of, there's less stress on the routine of the morning. The
stakes aren't as high.
Because part of what you have to do when you're kind of unraveling what's going on in the morning is you have to have the space to kind of really figure out, where's my child getting tripped up? Is it about remembering? Is it about getting distracted? Is it about, completing tasks? Is it about not understanding, the passage of time? Do you have even enough time built in to make sure that they can be successful? I mean, most of our kids take longer. At least for me, I know that my kids, either do really well when it's urgent and they've only got like 30 seconds to get out the door, or they need a really, really long time. And I've learned the hard way that if, it's like I kept giving my child more and more time and it was making it worse and worse. And I thought something's going on here. So let's wake them up 15 minutes before they have to get out the door. And it worked. So it's about, playing and being curious and exploring and making it really more of a experiment than trying to find the right solution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing I would add to that is that sometimes our kids, they're going to work well in some areas and not in others. And they're aware of the dynamic. They don't want to influence the family negatively. But I don't even know where I'm trying to go. I was thinking about an example in my family where mornings were really rough when the kids were young. And I remember sitting down one afternoon or at a family meeting and saying, so that morning was really rough for me. Did anyone else have a rough time? And it was about getting everyone's buy-in to the conversation that we wanted it to change in order to begin to make things change. And we really, now mornings are usually pretty smooth and we're usually late because we're sort of enjoying each other. But, at the beginning of a school year, I will scaffold more. I'll feed the dogs more, even though that's not my job. I'll, pick up slack in different areas until everybody's sort of back into routine. And then we can sort of slowly move back into the patterns that work. So allowing for change and flexibility. We talk about it in terms of flexible structure. People tell us we need structure and these kids need structure. And they do, but they need flexibility within that. And that's our opportunity as a parent to really meet them where they are.
here's one about self-esteem. It is hard for me to watch my son struggle with schoolwork and get down on himself. He tells me that he is stupid every couple of weeks. That's when I want to jump in and rescue him. What is the right balance between supporting your child and watching him go down the rabbit hole of sort of low self-esteem?
Advocate.
Yeah.
That's what's coming up.
Advocate and celebrate what works. You know? Yeah. So it's kind of like if you go a little bit overboard in terms of, the things that they do well, and you really kind of highlight and celebrate that. Everybody has strengths and everybody has challenges. And it's at the same time, I think that you don't want your child to, you don't want them to struggle too much, and you also want them to be challenged.
And to see that they can overcome the challenges. But if that is a constant routine of a child, regularly the self-esteem going to a place where the child is constantly feeling they're stupid, I would suggest that there's something else in terms of advocacy with the school that you may want to look at. I don't know whether this child has a 504 and IEP, whether the child's been evaluated for learning disabilities, but those are two places I would look immediately is to see what's setting the child up for feeling like this. There was a brilliant book written a number of years ago by a woman when we were starting to really understand ADD. And the title is something like, you mean I'm not lazy, crazy, or stupid? Yeah. And it's a very, very common experience for those of us with ADD who are to feel that feeling of I'm stupid. And on one level, we know we're not, but on another level, when you're constantly getting negative reinforcement, it's hard not to think so.
The other thing I would add is that, always ask the question, what else might be going on?
Yes.
Because I think the reality is if the child says, oh, I'm stupid, and there's an automatic trigger for you, and that brings you in closer to the situation, it may be what they've learned to do to get your attention. To get your attention. And so, you want to, if you're noticing that that's happening, it may be that you want to step a little closer just generally so that they aren't struggling and getting to the point where they're feeling like they're not doing as well as they want to.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that that's enabling. I think that there is a lot of opportunity, and there's an invitation for support here. There is something going on. When your instinct as a parent is that something's not right, most often trusting those instincts will serve you. And something in what you're describing doesn't sound like he's getting, or he or she is getting, the support that might be needed in order to feel successful.
Mm-hmm. One parent asks about body doubling, whether it's a good technique and what phase it would sort of fall into. Would it fall into phase 4 or phase 3 or...
all of the above.
All of the above. Body doubling is a phenomenal strategy.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what it is just being in the same space with someone else who's trying to get something done. Sometimes it can be working on the same thing together, but sometimes it can be working on two totally different things, but being in the same space.
I'm laughing because we were doing something. Elaine and I work in different offices, and we were on the phone together, and I was working on something, and she finally says, Diane, am I just here being your body double, or can I go do something else? And it's a very powerful thing, and it's a great way to observe and see how independent your child can be. Because if you're in the same space as them, it's easy to step in if you notice that
they're getting distracted.
They're getting distracted. It's easy to give recommendations and suggestions if there's a level 1 opportunity to come in and be more directive. Mm-hmm. But it's really about seeing where they're at and just being present and helping them through.
Well, the example I want to use, actually recently I was watching, I was so proud that my kids were using this. And so my middle child, who's in college, is pretty much mostly, I'm in phase 4 with her. She's very independent now. She does most things on her own. She asks for help when she needs it. And she was trying to pack to go back to college, and packing, for a lot of us with ADD is really stressful. And I was out, and I came home. She had been on the phone with her sister in California for hours, and they were just doubling with each other, trying to help each other get stuff done. They weren't really talking to each other. They were just being with each other, and they had learned to use the strategy really effectively. So
my daughter does that all the time. She does homework with her friends over FaceTime, and they, I'm like, "Are you distracted?" She goes, "No, she's working on her math, and I'm working on my whatever." It works really well.
It's a great strategy.
Mm-hmm.
All phases.
This one is sort of it's a little different, but it has to do with enabling versus supporting and a parent trying to maintain their support. My mother lives with us, and she is constantly criticizing me about not being tough enough on the kids. She doesn't like me doing things for them and says I am not teaching kids to be tough and to learn to be on their to take ownership of things. What would be a good response to her without offending her, because it's beginning to wear me down?
I would have her listen to this webinar.
Yeah, exactly. It's the whole thing is
Setting a theme here.
Well, and part of it is just kind of knowing, standing in your truth. And I think, we live in the South. And so when somebody says something that's well-meaning but not educated, you just say,
bless her heart.
Bless her heart. And so your mom clearly wants the best for you. And
bless her heart.
Wants your kids to be as independent as they can. And I think that kind of takes me back to the spouse earlier. It's like at the core, you both want the same thing. Is you want your kids to be as successful and independent as they can be. You're probably just approaching it in different ways. And so, you thank them and you appreciate their feedback, and you do what you need to do sometimes.
But you might take the 4 phases and do a little education, say, check out what I learned today. This is so interesting. And open the conversation to say, I do want to foster independence. This is where I'm going. And I think that sometimes we have a difference of opinion about, which phase we're in.
And it may be that mom can help you troubleshoot and figure out how to get from level 1 to level 2. Right. And kind of where are some areas where you've noticed that they might be able to be a little bit more independent. Let's try something and see what happens.
Right. But it's that fine line between fostering independence and, not sort of setting them up for failure. We do want to continue to do what we can to set our kids up for success, particularly our kids. So there's a lot of navigating.
But doesn't it also fall back to or go back to a parent understanding their child better than anybody? So they really have to follow their own instincts in terms of this support versus enabling, because they know their kids best.
Absolutely. I think that's true very, very often, more often than not, when somebody else is trying to tell us what we should be doing with our kid, and our instinct tells us we know our kid better, we understand our kid's challenges better. The opportunity and the challenge is to be patient with that person who may be trying to help and just doesn't understand it as well. And it's a really hard place to be. And an incredibly common issue that we hear all the time in all of our different programs and on our private forum is this issue of sort of family support. I actually wrote a blog once called Bless Her Heart. She just doesn't understand about, a family member who, may be well-intended, but really will never understand what has taken to raise my kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that'll have to be the last question. I think we're just about at 2:00. So
it's a great place to close.
Yes, that was terrific. Great strategies and insights. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else did. So thanks again.
I just want to invite anybody who's listening and all of your listeners to find out about all the coach approach that we teach at impactadhd.com. There's lots of great free resources there. And we're happy to provide whatever support we can. Thank you so much, Wayne, for having us.
Yeah.
Yes, great. Thanks for being here. Really great. Have a good day, everybody.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
Ever tried reading while jogging, cooking, or even juggling flaming torches? Yeah, it doesn't end well. But with audiobooks.com, you can conquer books without the circus act. Dive into over 450,000 titles, including more than 10,000 free ones. Get hooked on a bestseller, find your next obsession, or finally read that classic you've been avoiding since high school. And here's the inside scoop. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial and snag your first 3 audiobooks on the house. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.